When creating a rehab program for low back pain, we can break down the approach into 3 different phases. In this video, we'll go over those 3 different phases, plus some exercises for each one of those phases. The first phase is to find tolerated loads with a neutral spine emphasis. For some experiencing low back pain, it's a little bit too sensitive to begin moving, so whether that's bending forward or bending backwards. So in this stage, we're really just finding some exercises that start to contract the muscles without any movement in the spine, and this is what we're generally most familiar with when we look at low back pain rehab. So we can think of exercises like planks, side planks, and glute bridges as all exercises where we're contracting the muscles around the spine, but we're not actually trying to move that much through the spine. For planks, the goal is to keep the shoulders, hips, and ankles all in a straight line. If planks are still too challenging for the low back, then we could do a plank on knee where we try to keep the shoulders, hips, and knees all in a straight line, which just helps to reduce the load. For those who are typically experiencing low back pain with bending backwards, it can be helpful to emphasize contracting the glutes, which will help to bring the spine into a little bit more flexion. A similar approach is taken with the side plank, which will help to engage the muscles on the side of the body, either starting on the knees, which is the easier version, or the ankles, which increases the lever, which makes it a more challenging version. Lift the hips up off the ground so that the nose and the belly button are in a straight line. And then finally for the glute bridge, start by lying on your back, squeeze the glutes to lift the hips up off the ground. This is generally helpful for those experiencing low back pain with bending forward because contracting the glutes as well as the paraspinal muscles on the back help to extend the spine, so we're starting to load the spine in an extended position. When it comes to how long we should hold these exercises for or how many that we should do, there doesn't seem to be a very good answer. When it comes to trying to improve endurance, less than 10-second hold seems to be a more effective route because it has to do with how much oxygen is in the muscles. However, we see that improvements in endurance don't always reflect improvements in pain. So when it comes to pain, there seems to be a lot of variability in how people respond. Some people might respond better to shorter duration holds. Some people might respond to longer duration holds. So we really need to just try both of them out and see which one actually works better for you. The next phase is about building capacity to those painful movements, and unfortunately a lot of rehab programs actually don't address this, and that's because the exercises in the previous phase all emphasize a neutral spine, so they're thereby avoiding painful movements. But eventually we need to have a rehab program to address building up that capacity to those painful movements like bending forward or bending backwards. Let's take for example low back pain that is worse with bending forward, which is called flexion intolerant low back pain. The rehab program here will aim to find whatever flexion is tolerated and then gradually build up from there. An example would be to start with a quadruped rock. This is a low load exercise used to start exposing the spine to some flexion. Start by slowly rocking the hips back towards the heels and then back to that original starting position. The next progression would be to increase the challenge of the exercise by holding something like a curl up, initially using the elbows as necessary for assistance, and then doing them without that additional support of the elbows, so we're loading the spine with more flexion. Finally, doing something like a deep squat, which is going to flex the spine under greater load because we're using gravity through a large range of motion. And then a similar approach can be used for extension intolerant low back pain. First starting off with a quadruped rock, but instead of rocking back, rocking forward into a cobra position, which will start to expose the spine to a little bit more extension. Then progressing to a lift exercise, which is going to add more load in that extended position as we bring the band from low to high, and then it also adds a little bit of rotation as well. Finally, progressing to a standing kickback, which is going to further increase the challenge. As we extend the hip back, it'll contract both the glute muscles as well as the back extensor muscles, which will start to just add more load in that extended position. In the final phase, the goal is to add strength to the movements by increasing the load. This will help to make the low back more resilient in terms of both load and capacity, as well as the range of motion. For flexion intolerant low back pain, an example would be to load the squat. In the beginning, it might be helpful to start with a box squat, which will limit the amount of flexion, but gradually increasing the depth of the squat to challenge the spine throughout the entire range of motion. For extension intolerant low back pain, a deadlift or a good morning can be useful, whether that's starting off with an exercise band for resistance or some sort of weight like a kettlebell. An additional consideration is not only building up the tolerance by adding strength, but also speed as well. So an exercise like a kettlebell swing would be useful to help to expose the spine to some faster muscle contractions. If you made it to the end of the video, don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. If you want to see future topics, let me know in the comments below. I'll see you guys in the next video.